Welcome to the Mander's Mindset Podcast. Here you'll find both monologue and interviews of entrepreneurs, coaches, healers, and a variety of other people, where your host Amanda Russo will discuss her own mindset and perspective and her guest's mindset and perspective on the world around us. Manders and her guests will help explain to you how shifting your mindset will shift your life.
Before we jump into today's episode, I wanted to let you know Jenny and I had such an incredible conversation that we talked for almost 2 hours about so many things. And rather than making this an extra long episode, I decided to split it into 2 parts so it's a little easier to listen to. Today is part 1, where Jenny shares her incredible life story from immigrating to the United States as a child to navigating trauma, identity, motherhood, healing, and finding her voice. There are so many powerful moments in this conversation, and I truly know you are going to take away something from it. Be sure to come back this Friday for part 2, where we continue this conversation and dive even deeper. Now let's get into the episode. Welcome to Amanda's Mindset, where we explore the power of shifting your mindset to shift your life. I'm your host, Amanda Russo. I am here with Jenny C. Cohen, and she is a visibility and embodiment master, helping high-achieving 40-plus entrepreneurs transform fear of being seen into bold leadership. She's the creator of the Spotlight Confidence Formula. She's the host of the Dance to Heal podcast, ranked in the top 10% globally, and she's an author. Thank you so much for joining me, Jenny.
Amanda, I'm so honored to be here. Thank you for having me.
So, who would you say Jenny is at the core?
That's something I've actually been struggling with because now that my kids are grown and I'm understanding that even though I joke about raising my husband, we're married like 35 years and been together almost 40. If I take away those roles, who am I? And I would say that I am a conduit. I'm a conduit. When I'm very clear and anchored, meaning I'm very present, I get downloads all the time for people, from people that need to go other people. And I would say that. And I would like to be a joyful conduit. And that's oftentimes for women who are past our 40s, we forget to check in with ourselves. And I would say that's what I would love for people to remember as we hit the second part of our lives.
That makes a lot of sense. I haven't hit that second part of my life, but it makes a lot of sense, as goals change, as the kids grow up, as they move out, as that main identity of caregiver, mom, is shifted.
Yeah.
Would you say you've always been a conduit?
I would say I've always been a conduit. I don't know if I was necessarily present during the conduitcy. I would dare say everyone's a conduit, and it's just more how willing are you to be one? Because I love this analogy that we're all meat bags flying through space on this little planet that's blue.
I have never heard that in my life.
Really? Because at the dance school, they talk about us all being meat bags, like meaning we're all unified in being alive and bodies made of mostly water, right? And so water conducts energy and frequencies. And I would say all of us all have cells, atoms, blood, a brain, skin, hair, and we're all conduits.
Can you take us down memory lane Tell me a little bit about your childhood, upbringing, family dynamic, however deep you want to take that.
Oh, that would be my pleasure. So way back when the dinosaurs were alive, I'm kidding. So I'm level 57. Charlie Johnson calls ages levels, right? So I'm level 57, about to turn level 58 in July. And back in my day, that's 1968, y'all. I was born in Taipei, Taiwan. And unfortunately, it's a very patriarchal family I was born into. A lot of Asian cultures value sons over daughters. And my birth wasn't recognized for a month after I was born. Now, has a 57 level, I can understand the impact. Back then, I didn't understand it. And I really wasn't assigned a role, which was second mother to my brother when he was born 18 months later. And so most of my life has been serving. Later on, once we immigrated to the States, I was about 5 and put right into first grade. Later on, the role of serving for safety became necessary because I didn't speak English. And I was thrown into a culture I didn't understand. So if you're an immigrant and you come to this country, things like the Tooth Fairy and Santa Claus and a whole turkey for Thanksgiving, I didn't have when I first came to the States. So to my surprise, Tooth Fairy and Santa always bypassed my house. Like I left so many teeth under my pillow, so many empty stockings because I didn't understand. And then we realized, oh, those are the parents that do that. I was lucky enough to have parents that could afford for me to go to college. I went to Brandeis University, and I had been volunteering at a camp for kids with disabilities at Camp Jabberwocky in Martha's Vineyard. And there I met an occupational therapist, and I thought, oh, I want to do that. So then I graduated from Brandeis and went to BU to become an occupational therapist. And I will tell you, occupational therapists, we learned to break tasks down, which made me an excellent mother when my fraternal twins were born. My fraternal twins were through in vitro fertilization because my husband had testicular cancer when we were newlyweds. So yeah, could you imagine my mother-in-law drove us to the sperm bank? That's another story. And no, serious, like it was interesting. And so when we had our fraternal twins, they were at that time, they're 27 now, but back 27 years ago, when you're born at 36 weeks, that was considered premature. Not now. That's pretty full baked. But back then it was considered premature. And so I was very grateful for my occupational therapy training because I had some idea of what proper development was. And I caught some things that my kids were delayed in. And then I ended up homeschooling them, and they were competitive baton twirlers, then rhythmic gymnasts, then competitive dancers. And then they dabbled in fencing. And then I got breast cancer and we moved out west. And then the pandemic hit.
Jenny, you've told me your life in like 4 minutes. Don't forget to breathe.
But this is when you step in because you're the breathing goddess.
So we're going to backtrack just a tad. So do you only have one younger brother
I only have one younger brother.
and no older siblings?
No, I'm the eldest daughter.
You said you weren't recognized until your brother was born. I don't know if you would remember, but do you know at all what that looked like by not being recognized?
As an adult, I understand it meant that my parents, first of all, I was the firstborn, so they didn't know what to do with me, right? Even though I know that my mother raised her 5 younger brothers after she was born. My mother came from a family of 9, so there were 4 daughters. She was the 4th daughter, and after her came 5 sons. And she helped raise all 5 sons. She's still very close to her brothers. So my mother knew how to deal with babies. I think she just didn't expect to have a baby that soon, and it wasn't a boy. So she had to deal with her own personal feelings about that. I mean, she's resolved it. We have a much better relationship now. But back then, right, she was married. My parents were the first non-arranged marriage in their generation. So they married for love. Their story is that my father saw my mother working in a seamstress shop, ripped his shirt to have her fix it. That's how they met. He ripped his shirt on purpose. And my parents were they were good looking back then, so of course he did that. And what my mom didn't quite compute in her brain, even though she understood the patriarchy type of setup, was that when my father was quote unquote successful, at least making money, all of his money was sent home. It did not matter if he got married and gave birth to a baby. He wasn't keeping any of that money. All his money was sent back to his parents in the country, even after marriage. And my mom didn't know that. So then it was a double burden on top of the fact that, oh, the firstborn wasn't a son. So it was this burden on burden on burden. And in retrospect, I understand that affected me in utero, after birth, when I was growing up, that I wasn't really beloved. To this day, if I see these videos now where it doesn't matter what the baby is, boy or girl, usually it's girl, and the parents and grandparents are so excited with the little baby, I didn't experience that per se. And so I understand now, coming forward, all the things I went through, why that was allowed to repeat over and over. Like I would date the wrong guys. I would let people take advantage of me over and over again. When you learn your patterns from your past, you start to be like, well, this isn't good enough for me. I'm like, no, you're going to be a real friend to me because I'm one to you, right? And then I also learned not to do things I didn't want to do. That's a hard one, Amanda, because all women are conditioned to say yes. No's are not allowed, right? We're not allowed to be like, no, I don't feel like it. Then we're branded as selfish, right? Or too independent. And that those are some, you would think I'm married almost 35 years, been with the same guy for almost 40, homeschool my 2 kids. I would have somehow learned that before I hit 50. And it wasn't until after I hit 50 I learned to say no and set limits and be like, wait a minute, I'm surrounded with people other than my family, but my friends that I would just let walk all over me. And I realized, wait a minute, it's going to go both ways.
How'd you realize that?
When I got breast cancer and when I was asking a trio their name and why it sounded so racist to me, and they got me kicked out of the venue that I was hosting someone from California, and I was in New York in the middle of my chemo. And then they asked me to keep it quiet, not to cause any waves in the dance community there. And I'm going through chemo, so I had chemo brain. I didn't know to put up a ruckus. I wrote about it in my book. Don't you worry about that. Like I hadn't really learned that I had a right to my voice. And that's part of the whole outside in recovery that my book talks about, is that if you don't use your voice to fight for you, I was really good at fighting for my kids, my husband, but not for me. If you don't speak up, then you will internalize the blame to yourself. And I want to tell you that really was a part of my recovery, because I know, because there's no history of breast cancer. I was under so much duress in my life that I literally set up my own immune system to get cancer. And that's something I want people to understand. The more boundaries you set that are healthy for you, the more your body can fight off diseases. But if we don't do that, we're opening up a lot of pathways. We just don't even know it. It's ridiculous. I know it sounds woo, but I think it's really, really important to learn.
No, I've never had cancer myself, but I believe that maybe not necessarily like just cancer in general, but like diseases, illnesses, they come on more frequently than not from some sort of stress, whether it's stated that way or not.
Yeah, and it is correlated oftentimes as women hit mid-age, like perimenopause and menopause, or even pre-perimenopause. We have things happening in our bodies that we don't know about, like the education level has to go up. And it's affecting also our autoimmune system. So combined with inabilities to say no, it puts a lot of stress on our nervous systems and our immune systems. So it's time for us to learn about that kind of stuff, because it's all correlated. When I got breast cancer, and since January of this year, 26, I will be 11 years breast cancer free. And back then at 44, I was diagnosed. That was considered very young. Now we're getting women with younger and younger ages with breast cancer, which is ridiculous. Like, why are younger women getting breast cancer? It was considered like an older woman's disease, and now it's getting younger. I think it's because of the stress and the environmental factors. All of that is affecting.
I'd love to transition back a tad. You mentioned starting first grade when you moved to the United States around 5, and you didn't speak English. I cannot imagine that, how difficult that was for you.
I can't fathom it as an adult, right? You think about it. Oh, I had been separated from my father for a couple of years, and then he came back to Taiwan and picked up my mom and my brother and and we flew, was it 18 hours to, I think it was south of Brookline, and then we ended up in Massachusetts. And I remember they put me right into first grade. So certain parts of the country have different start dates for kindergarten and first grade. In Boston area or Brookline area, Somerville actually was my first grade, my first year. They're cut off September 1st. My birthday's in July. So I was the youngest of my class when they put me into first grade. I really should have gone into kindergarten. I was tiny. So I was not only the youngest, I was the smallest of my class, right? And I remember the first day they found another little girl that spoke my dialect. So she translated for me for one day, and then she refused to afterwards because all the kids were making fun of her. So I had no one to translate for me from day 2. And then actually I had an accident in my seat because I didn't know how to ask for the bathroom. So I like peed myself the first week of school. Yeah. If I were to consciously think back, I have no memories because it was probably so traumatic. My brain just shut off any memory because I didn't want to deal with it. Well, you learn fast. Kids adjust quick. Really, truly. My kids who were homeschooled, they were very resistant to learning to read. And I'm one of those parents. I'm not a helicopter parent, like an Asian helicopter parent when it comes to learning, because I hated being forced to get A's when I was growing up. My thing is my kids had classes that I would have them signed up for, but if they couldn't explain to me what they learned, they had to repeat that unit. Right? And then my kids didn't want to learn to read. So then I found audiobooks that had amazing sound effects and actors actually speaking the lines in the book and reading. And then I got the book. And then I don't think I consciously knew this, but every time we got to an exciting part, I had to pull over and exit. We'd have to get out of the car. So my kids got so frustrated, just picked the book and taught themselves to read to find out what came next. So kids are very adaptable, and I know that I learned to adapt very quickly. It was kind of learn to speak and listen, or you're gonna it was a survival technique. So I just have to do it.
Survival technique. So you mentioned you don't remember a lot of it. What would you say is one of your earliest memories that you do remember?
One of my earliest memories I do remember is right before we came to the States. So we came to the States when I was like 5. So maybe when I was about 4. My earliest memories are I had been playing hide and seek in the street with my cousins in Taipei. And they fell on me. And I didn't realize I broke my arm, but we were afraid to tell the grown-ups. So I was hiding from them with my arm cradle. And then after that, I remember waking up because they had to break my arm because it was not in the right thing. And I was in a cast. That's the earliest memories. So when I was 4, my brother was 2, and my father immigrated to the States, and my mother was working in Taipei. So if you think of Taiwan as like a beam, we were in the northern tip of Taiwan, the capital, Taipei. Very, very city, cement, plumbing, electricity. And when my father came to the States, my mother had a job, and so she couldn't care for us, and there was no one to care for us. And so they sent me down south to the bottom of the beam, down here, and it was very rural, like Shrek country. No electricity, no plumbing. There were dirt floors in the house, 2-room hut that we were sent to. And my grandparents were not literate. And I didn't speak the Taiwanese dialect because I had been speaking Mandarin. So they sent us down there for 8 months. I don't have any memory of that because that's kind of traumatic for a 4-year-old. And I was told that my mom went back to visit me, like almost both of us, every weekend. And I would be screaming and crying and chasing after her when she left every time she came to visit. And I'm like, oh, I'm glad I don't remember that. And then there's one thing I remember of that particular time. 2 things. I hated the dark because I would always fall in the chamber pot. I fall in because I was so small, their chamber pots, because their bathrooms were like the Shrek closets in the middle of outside in the dark. There's no electricity. So they had the chamber pot, and I would fall in that a lot. And 2, because they left my brother and I during the day alone, they were farmers. My job was to get my brother close the doors when it got dark. And the way they scared me to do it was that everyone knows the story. If you're from Taiwan, they have a fable, or more like a horror story, that there's a fox that liked to eat children and it could assume human form. And they would look for kids that hadn't closed their doors at dusk. And they could imitate your family members. So you had to, I know, I'm 4. And I just remember the story about how would you know your kid was eaten? The fox would leave one pinky finger of the child.
My mouth is wide open.
So when I talk about this, anyone from town like, yeah, I know the pinky. The adults laugh. And I'm like horrified. You told her, the 4-year-old, to scare her so she would close the doors and lock herself and her 2-year-old brother in the dark until you came home, because this fox would want to eat them and leave just her pinky finger on the floor and they would know she was gone. Those are my earliest memories. I told you I would hold nothing back in this interview, Amanda.
If you have not held anything back, do you remember? I have so many questions about the arm, but you probably don't remember like telling. You obviously told them if somehow it got rebroken and like fixed.
You know how they talk about how Gen X in the States, you just came home after dark. You were expected to come home when the streetlights came on. I think they eventually realized I've been missing for a few hours. But it is what it is. Like, you expect to keep yourself. Kids were expected when I was little to be quiet and not see. It's just, what do you mean you have feelings? Like, hello? You had a roof over your head and clothing and food. What more do you need? Because my parents came from really, really levels of poverty I don't know if people understand these days. Because my mom's side of the family, they were from the middle part of Taiwan, a little bit, quote unquote, more affluent. They had a light bulb in the courtyard. That was considered like high tech. One lone light bulb, but they somehow were able to access electricity. But the rest of the houses had no electricity, just one light bulb, because everything else was lit by candles. And that was it. So for them, if my brother and I got the bare necessities and we didn't have to test, because my parents immigrated to the States because here in the States, access to education was more, SATs. And if you could have the right GPA. In Taiwan at the time, only the top, I believe, 3% went on to college. The rest were expected to go into the labor force. Could you imagine that? Like, it didn't matter if you were top 10%. You had to be top 3% to be able to go to like top university or even university.
Wow.
Not now. Back then, it was just understood. You had to be top. And my mom didn't go to grade school. She actually went to Taipei to earn money to put herself through high school. So my mom didn't have a higher education at high school level, but she still ended up being a ranking military in Taipei before they came to the States.
I'm curious how schooling was for you once you were in the United States, growing up, evolving, middle school, high school, like how that was for you.
Well, I learned to rebel here in the States because let's remember, in the States, there's a lot of emphasis in schools placed on individuality. Expressing yourself, because now going into the 70s, right? I came here in 1974. It was all about liberation, self-expression, and I was getting exposed to that at schools. And then I had to go home, and it was expected to be obedient and not question your parents. There were many fights as I entered puberty. And so then I learned, I have a choice in getting good grades. And piss off my parents if I don't hand in those honors English assignments. I know. And there's a lot of extracurricular things that I enjoyed that had nothing to do with grades, which I detested. And now when I look back, I had some level of undiagnosed ADHD. Because now they talk about, right? What were the signs for girls with ADHD? They lived in their own worlds. I lived in my own world a lot. And it wasn't just because I came from a biculture where it was one culture at home and one culture at school. I had a lot of difficulty. I dare say I also had some form of odd ADHD because I didn't understand social cues. I would think someone was my friend and they weren't. I always think I was being good friends to someone. They'd be like, "You're not being good friends to me." I'm like, "Why? What did I do? What did I not do?" Like, I didn't understand because there were no parents to even show me. My parents were busy, working a restaurant that had opened, and those are 7-day weeks, 12-hour days. I was one of the latchkey kids with the key tied to a string around my neck because I had to get home from school by myself and keep myself busy until my mom came home with takeout from the restaurant for dinner. But then she had to go back to work, and I had to get my brother and I to bed. We were quietly watching TV until we heard the car come home.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Did you ever get out of this rebellious phase that you were in?
I would say now I finally came out of it.
Now?
Well, okay, listen. You have to understand. I was one of the first interracial couples in our family because I married a white presenting man. Okay. And I loved it because I could say I was Jenny C. Cohen, and people were like, "Oh, you're not Mrs. Ling for 2:00." I'm like, "No, I'm Jenny C. Cohen. You're 3:00." I didn't keep my maiden name just so I could mess with people. And I did not apply to all of the Ivy League schools my parents wanted me to. I didn't want to do it. I refused to. I mean, first of all, I wasn't competitive enough because I made sure my grades weren't good enough. Like, subconsciously, I just didn't want to do it. And then when our kids were born, I homeschooled them, which was unheard of in the Asian culture back then. It's very in vogue more right before the pandemic. And then there was the awfulness of people who had no choice and had to do it. We felt bad for people like that because it's not an easy choice to homeschool your kids. It's just completely different universe and perspective. And people were also trying to work full time. And it's just not a fair back-to-back type of thing. And I understood that. But I did not work that whole time when I was homeschooling my kids. I chose not to because it was just, I had my hands full. They were elite athletes. So at one point, both my kids were junior Olympians. Like, they had gone all the way up there and they ended up medaling. And that takes a lot of time on top of homeschooling. I couldn't really, other than, side jobs like teaching dance here and there or being like a parent coach of the team. That was all I had time for.
I gotcha. Now, you mentioned not even applying to Ivy League schools. Where did you go to college?
Brandeis and Waltham, which was like the Jewish Harvard. I would
Okay.
want to go there because my parents knew a local judge in Brookline who told them that's a very good school.
I've
And then
never
I was
even
like,
heard of that school.
Brandeis University is in Waltham, and they did a lot of medical research breakthroughs at that university. They came up with Brandeis because for a while, Jewish people weren't allowed into the Ivy Leagues. So they came up with their own college.
How'd you enjoy that?
I loved it. I really did. And I was allowed to live on campus, which was the first time. Of course, in retrospect, I would have liked to have been more in my body and present because I picked all the wrong guys to date until my husband. When I was unknowingly like a complex PTSD survivor, I didn't know that I was kind of a homing beacon for anyone who was looking for victims. Does that make sense? We learned through some therapies that if you've gone through any type of, so there's a trigger warning for your audience. If you've gone any type of SA, sexual assault or pedophilia, where you're the child victim and you don't know it, it affects our chemistry. And now we almost have like a unconscious homing beacon for people who are looking for us. It's hard to be aware that we're doing that. And they've done studies where they've asked criminals or pedophiles, a room full of kids, they can pick out the kids who are already abused like that. They know. There's a aura we get until we're healed.
Wow. I didn't know that.
There's more and more data coming out. And it's a shame because more of that goes on than we are actually willing to. Okay, because I'm, again, Gen X. And my generation was all about, boys will be boys, men will be men behaviors. And a lot of that wasn't really good behaviors that we allowed. Right? And even now these days, for the younger generations, because we're so much on the internet and there's no actual responsibility for what you type on the line, there's way more allowances for behaviors that would never be tolerated in person. They just came out and there were like 600 million views. 600 million views in this academy, literally, of anonymous men talking about how they were like essaying their own wives or drugging their wives, streaming, making money off of it. And people are like, what? These are people, their own partners, and 600 million views, people. Like, I'm like, that has to be talked about. We have to be more aware of it. Like, I have a person I know this might be another trigger warning for your audience, who's in the sex industry, right? And she was a pastor. She's very out in the open about this. And she was a pastor. And the amount of shaming she gets for that. And I'm kind of like, oh, more power to her, because she's a single parent. She had an abusive husband before, right? She has multiple partners. I'm like, great. But if a man did that, no one would care. They'd be like, he's just a boy being a boy. And I'm like, man, like, they also swing both ways. When I was moving out to Utah, they're known for sister wives here. My girlfriends were all like, are you going to become a sister wife? I'm like, no, I'm going to have brother husbands. Because I need at least 7 people to replace what I do, which is true. We're all expected to be 7 different people. One guy can't do what I do. There have to be 7 of them to do what I do. Right? Real talk, like really seriously. And my husband is the first person to agree. Like, when I travel and I go on a short trip or a long trip, by day 2, and this is someone I've been married to for over 30 years, he'll start sending me texts. We have kids that are grown right now, Amanda. They're not little babies. And he still feels the pressure of being a parent and working full time and managing our plethora of pets and his own personal feelings. And like, by day 2, I'm getting texts from him. I so appreciate what you do. You're such a wonderful person. I'm like, I'm still not coming back early.
You're so right, though, about like standards being still different for men versus women. And it's kind of crazy to me in 2026 that we're still dealing with this.
It feels a lot like growing pains for the human race. We're like taking like puberty or something, just across the board. I don't know what's going on. And just feel like a giant shift for us, right? And I feel like you have a little bit of backsliding before you launch to the next level. I'd rather look at it as that way, even though it does feel like we're very going backwards. The original Charlie's Angels were 3 white women, but the brunette we could imagine was Asian because she was brunette. She had bangs. We kind of pretend she was Asian. We didn't have the Lucy Liu's back then, if you really think about it. So the world is getting different, even if it feels like we're backsliding. We are shifting.
No, I like your analogy about like the puberty, but it makes sense. So you went to college over there, and did you study occupational therapy?
Undergrad was psychology because it fulfilled a lot of the prerequisites to get into Boston University occupational therapy master's degree program. Now, I've heard that they've already discontinued that, and the current administration they took a certain number of degreed jobs and made them certificates. So like right now, occupational therapy in the country is not a profession anymore. Don't ask me why. Like, there was a certain number of like speech therapists, occupational therapists.
Oh, okay.
I know. I keep
What?
Stuff like that. I don't know why. They just decided it wasn't worth the government funding, and so they demoted a bunch of professions.
Okay.
No. Anyway, but yeah, so I ended up going to get my master's degree at Boston University. That was fun.
The leftovers?
Yeah, because the medical students would actually do the dissecting, and then we would go in and study all the actual human anatomical things that we were studying to understand better how the body worked.
Okay. Now, did you go for your master's right after undergraduate?
Yeah, I went right into it.
Okay. Yeah. And you liked your master's better than undergrad?
Well, undergrad was my first time away from home, so I made some poor choices in terms of boyfriends, and still was rebellious with grades, because I still remember. So we had this chemistry professor, and she was German, so she spoke with a very thick German accent. And she would write and erase at the same time. So if you weren't fast enough, we didn't have telephones with iPhones with the screenshots. So I could never get half of the things she wrote down before she erased it. And then, she would have the disappearing stacked over chalkboards. So she would write it out. If you weren't quick enough, she would slide it up. You couldn't see it anyways. I ended up getting a C in chemistry. She was very intelligent, very nice, but just teaching was terrible. And I remember thinking to myself, why is this so hard? And I had so many extracurricular things. I did dance, I did modeling, I did crew for sports. I really enjoyed that. But I didn't really find my way until master's degree and said, I really want to help people as an occupational therapist. And that was completely different. It felt like I actually learned things, but not undergrad.
Okay. Now, you mentioned you did dance in undergrad. Is that when dance first came into your world?
Actually, dance first came into my world when I was very young. When I was like an itty bitty, I convinced my mother to let me do ballet, and I think I was maybe 9.
Oh, in the U.S. doing ballet.
Because I came to the States when I was 5, and it took me 4 years to convince my mother to let me take ballet. And I did some ballet, and I liked it, and then she was kind of like, I guess it's a waste of time, it's done. So I was like, okay. And then I didn't really start to do any type of dance until I hit high school, and Miss Levine taught ballet and modern, and I took her as much as I could during those 4 years in high school. And I loved, because I remember ballet from when I was 9, how safe it made me feel. Even though ballet is really hard, but it got me really present because it was so hard to do. And it was one of the few times, if I think back over my youth, where I have like happy feelings when I think about it, and I was really actually in my body. All the rest of the time, it was like survivorship, and I wasn't in my body. I don't remember much of anything other than when I was in dance classes. Yeah. And then in college, I struggled the first year. I had like some art classes, but my parents made it clear, you're not going to have a career in art, okay? There's no art for you. Like, come on, lawyer, doctor, right? Something like that would be nice, where we could brag about it to family. And I was like, all right, well, I'll be an occupational therapist. That means I still wear a white jacket and I'm in a hospital. So you have to be happy with that. I'll do that, all right? But I'm not going to be a doctor. It's too much debt. I don't want to do that. I had not even a nurse. That wasn't high level for my parents, right?
Okay.
Deborah Messing and I were in the same year at Brandeis University. So I got to take dance classes with Deborah Messing. And so we took 2 semesters of classes. But then I realized, I want to go get my master's degree. So I had to start focusing on prerequisite. And then that turned into my psychology major. And then I really didn't get back to dance until I graduated and started working as an occupational therapist. And I was in New York City, and I was going to Broadway Dance Center. And I got to do those classes after work. And I loved hip hop, but I couldn't get the rhythm of it until I started doing belly dance in my 30s. Because belly dance talks a lot about interrhythms off of the downbeat. And then my hip hop was hip hopping at that point, because I could listen and hear the beat in between the beats. Then my hip hop got good.
Wow. Now, when you were doing these in high school, was that at your actual school for like
Yeah.
classes?
Yeah.
Oh,
Why did it
wow.
actually had that type of stuff?
Wow. That's cool that you were able to do that.
It was amazing. I think my senior year, I got to take 2 classes of dance because I have fulfilled all my other high school diploma things. And so I finagled a semester or 2 where I got to have Miss Levine twice a week instead of like 1 class. I think she was an amazing teacher. One of the few that I felt seen by. I mean, obviously, I still remember her name.
Jenny, oh my God, you're so cute. So I'm curious, transitioning again a tad. You mentioned picking non-suitable, non-good men for you. How did that transition for you?
So this will be a trigger warning for your audience, okay? I had a semi-serious boyfriend behind my parents back in high school, which wasn't really anything because we went to Taiwan, came back, and then we didn't really pick up anything that we left off with. Like, I skipped a couple of classes to make out with him at a movie theater, and that was it. Then I went to Taiwan, came back, and then he lost interest. I lost interest. I had a kind of boyfriend for the prom senior year, but he was more interested in flirting with my friends than really being with me. So then I learned early on that your girlfriends aren't safe. They'd rather have the boys' attention than be your friend. And I tolerated it, right? Until later. And then college, my very first boyfriend was a senior, and he was going off to medical school. And he was Catholic. And I had told him quite firmly I wasn't going to lose my virginity. This is a trigger warning for your audience. I wasn't going to lose my virginity until I married someone. And then he got me drunk, and then he forced me to have sex with him. And then he cried because he was Catholic and he had sinned. So I'm comforting my rapist. So then I promptly forgot about it for a year. And then when I remembered a year later, after he left from med school, I had a breakdown. Like, no one knew. I was just very quietly, very depressed and honestly suicidal for a good 3 years. But, you don't see these things that they were danger. Does that make sense? And then that ex-boyfriend had the audacity to come back, expect to sleep with me again, and then compare me to a big screen TV. I'm not making this up. This is true. He came back and said, I didn't appreciate you. You're like this big screen TV that you first get and you want to show her off to your friends. Then after you, for a few months, you take it for granted until it breaks. And then you miss it. I'm like, oh my God, you're going to be a doctor? Like, stop. That was my first serious boyfriend.
Oh, Jenny, I'm so sorry you experienced that.
Yeah.
Wow.
You asked about the shift, though. My husband, he was a year younger than me, and we dated for a year, and then he proposed. And I remember when he proposed, the immediate thing I heard in my head was, he'll be a good father to your kids. That was the thing. I could see him being a good father. None of the other men before that I dated could I ever see trusting my kids with. Because I think I didn't realize that, another trigger warning for your audience, I didn't realize that I was SA'd when I was in the country with my grandparents. I just didn't really feel safe as a child. And I knew I had to be with a partner that I could trust with my babies. I was like, yes, I could totally trust him. And so then I said yes.
That makes so much sense. Wow. No, you said he was a year. Did you go to school with him?
Yeah, he was a year younger. Like, we first met, the first year we met, he was a photographer and I was a volunteer clown. And I was with another clown and his name was Steve. And we were just joking because you're a clown. And he would not crack a smile. And I was like, he's got no sense of humor. That's the first year I met him. Then we went about our lives. And then the second year, we were both on the volunteer committee to bring in the first year students. So at that point, he was a junior and I was a senior. And we kind of started to click a little bit, even though I had a boyfriend at the time. And then eventually we ended up just staying together. And then a year later, he proposed.
Oh, that's so sweet.
Yeah.
So sweet.
He almost drove us to Canada that weekend because he was so nervous about proposing.
What do you mean he almost drove you to Canada?
We decided to go away for the weekend, and he was driving me up to the outlets in Burlington, Vermont. And he missed the exit and didn't realize because he was so nervous. He kept going, and we were getting closer and closer to the border between the States and Canada. And then he had to turn around and go back to Burlington, Vermont. That's my favorite part of the story. Not him proposing to me romantically at the Wolf Park Reservation out in the middle of nowhere. The favorite part is that he almost drove us to Canada.
Oh my God, Jenny, I'm dead. That's funny. And you mentioned you have two twins.
Yes.
Twin boys. Is that just all the kids? Just the two of them?
We have fraternal twins through in vitro. So back in the day, they didn't know how successful the fertilized eggs would take, And so like my husband had testicular cancer before his second surgery and before he did the chemotherapy, he donated sperm. When we wanted to have kids, we defrosted his sperm and then they harvested the eggs. And here's the silver lining part of this, okay? When you go through in vitro, they have to work up the female part. And they discovered I had very severe endometriosis and a chocolate cyst on one of my ovaries that could have turned cancerous. So the silver lining was if he had never gotten cancer, we may never have had kids. Because, normally without the cancer part of it, right, with the sperm, storage, if you can't have kids, they do the most lowest level of intervention before they go to in vitro, which is the highest level of intervention. If he hadn't gotten testicular cancer, we wouldn't have gone straight to IVF and had me worked out back then. It would have been like, oh, we'll do this low-key thing. We'll pump up your hormones. They didn't know that much about endometriosis back then either. It wasn't a recognized disease in women. Do you know now they even found endometriosis in people's eyeballs? It's all throughout your body when you have it.
And now, what is endometriosis?
It's a type of tissue that overgrow it. Okay. Endometrial lining inside the uterus that grows outside of your uterus. So when you're cycling in your period, it will fill with blood. Here's the scary part. The endometrial tissue is almost like what's that lizard that can blend in with its environment? What is that? That animal?
A chameleon?
Yes. The endometriosis tissue is like chameleon. It will assume the color and shape of the tissue it's with. So if they just remove your uterus, if you have bad endometriosis, you may still have endometrial tissue in your lungs, your sphincter, in your intestines, but it mimics the tissue it's on. So they didn't until recently recognize, unless you trained with a surgeon that specializes, to know and show you what it looks like when it's in other parts of your body. That's because in the beginning, they would just, oh, she's got severe endometriosis. We'll just remove her uterus. And then the woman would be like, I'm still in pain. And then a nurse really pushed doctors to go back and figure out what's going on. And so now there's no whole specialty now on endometriosis. They've even found endometriosis in men now.
Hmm.
You don't know what you don't know until they figure it out, right? So the endometriosis and the chocolate cyst would have prevented naturally getting pregnant. So when we did the in vitro, we ended up with two miracle babies. Yep.
Wow. That's amazing, though.
Yeah, total blessings. And I do have permission to speak on this because my kids are of legal age, and we are more open about this particular part of what I'm going to share with your audience because it's really important. Because my kids were miracles. When my son, because I gave birth to 2 girls, but my son transitioned female to male. And when he first told me, I was kind of like, okay, what do you want us to call you? What pronouns do you want? And they expected another reaction. I was kind of like, no, I've met parents who actually lost their kids died. You're not dying. You're just transforming to something else. Like, you're still alive. And I was very honored they shared that transition and kept me in their lives. So it's not ever like I didn't get a say in what they want to be or need to be. My goal is just to support them. And so my son is my son and my daughter is non-binary. And she uses she, they pronouns. I'm still understanding this, y'all. Like, I don't have all the answers. Okay. I just am glad my kids are alive.
That's
There's a high rate of suicide for people in those populations because their family members don't understand and they don't support them. And I'd much rather have 2 live kids.
That's an amazing perspective to have. That community loses connections with a lot of their family. I've had friends, and it changes their relationships and it's far often with the family.
The very people that you would think would support you are the ones who are the first to reject them. And that's heartbreaking. And people would ask me, well, how do your parents react? And I was kind of, I didn't care. Either, I wasn't supposed to be a parent. If you think about all the things I shared with you, right? And here we have these miracle babies. I take that role very seriously. How they say, there's the belief, I hear this belief, like, my kids picked me as their parent before they were born. I'm very blessed. I could have easily been a single parent. Lots of money, by the way. Be out of debt right now. I could be living the high life, but I was like, no, I want to be a parent. And again, I wouldn't ever choose any different.
Is there anything that helped you have that perspective?
Because it was so hard to become a parent. Like, literally every step of making the baby, there was no private part about it. Y'all, like, if you've never had an internal ultrasound where a person's like driving a stick shift car inside your hoo-ha with a stick, you have no idea what I'm talking about. It was a very public pregnancy. It wasn't I'm just going to have sex with my husband in the privacy of my room and get pregnant. It was, oh, we have to operate on you and clear out your plumbing. It was, driving into New York City with your mother-in-law and then sitting in the waiting room with her while your husband went and donated sperm. Like the room itself, okay, sperm donation centers, but where they freeze your sperm. Okay, I have to tell you, this is a really funny story. I thought it was funny. So they're going to have to enjoy the story. We get into this office, but then the room where they have to donate the sperm, it looks like a porn office. Like there's dark lighting and a chair with paper and all these porn videos and porn magazines to try to get the man to be able to ejaculate into a cup. And my husband was like, "Are you going to stay in here with me?" I was like, "No, I am not going to stay in here. This is one of the few times you have my full permission to fantasize about anyone and anything you need to." And I left in that room. And then I had to go wait out in the waiting room with my mother-in-law. And then when they fertilize the eggs, we have pictures of my children have 8-cell organisms. Not the, I have the naked butt baby pictures, but I literally have pictures of them has like little cells, like little balls multiplying. Like how many? I when I got quote pregnant, they took an instrument that looked like a turkey baster and squirted them into me through my cervix, and then I had to lie there for an hour, hoping that they would take on my uterine wall. And so I'm like, it's a miracle that I got to be a mom. So technically, God was like, "No, we would like you to be a dink, dual income, no kids." I was like, "I beg to differ. I would like a baby." And the God was like, "Give me 2." I'm like,
So I've got a question, Jenny. If anybody listening to us is a parent and has a child that is transitioning or they want to, do you have any suggestions for them to be more open-minded to it?
Yes. So first of all, we do have to be careful because current administration makes it actually against the law for you to enable your child to be any gender they are, any other gender than what they were assigned on their birth certificate. Certain states will not allow you to do that, just so you know, like unfortunately, legally, okay? And we transitioned my son at that cusp between 17, 18, when you become legal age and a legal adult. We didn't know that that's how it worked out. But what we did was more at first. I was afraid that before he was just rejecting it because I was going through breast cancer at the time. I was like, "Are you just afraid of your giant boobs that you inherited from, my mother-in-law?" Because I had tiny boobs, and my kids, when they went into puberty, got these boobs that are like bigger than my head, and we did not know like what the hell. And it was because it was from my husband's part of the family. They inherited that, and I was like, "Are you just afraid to have boobs because mom's going through breast cancer?" And we had discussions about that, and the answer was like, "No, I do not identify as female." So I was like, "All right, well, we just moved to Utah. What pronouns would you like? What would you like to be called?" And they gave me a nickname that was a shortened version of their birth name. And they asked for different pronouns. So we switched their identities because we had just moved. And I was just like, the old people that we know back east, we'll just start referring to you as your preferred name. Here, though, in Utah, what we did was we set him up with a therapist. We started investigating a doctor that would start him on hormones. But he was already 16, 17 because he really wanted the top surgery. And when we met with the specialist, they were like, "You may want to start the T first before you do, be on the T before you start this, before you go for the top surgery." The biggest thing as an adult, like your parent, is that you support them and keep the conversation open. Because here's the thing, if you're their parent and you accept them for whoever and however they want to be, your goal is just to keep a safe path for them and be their support. Because oftentimes what causes them to be a little bit more inclined to self-harm or to take their own lives is when their own most beloved people don't accept them for who they need to be, to want to be alive. That's the biggest thing. Because no one chooses a hard life like that, I'm going to tell you. No one's like, "I'm going to wake up and be the opposite of," and just mess with it and have people always not, like, "Hey, let it be a fight every day, everywhere." No one chooses that. It's not a choice. It's like, and I was lucky enough to have that I was conduit for them, that moment that I didn't want, just to first make sure you were afraid you have boobs. No. Okay, great. Then what do you want to be called? What's your preferred pronoun? Done. I was always in the back of my head going, are they just having an identity crisis? But I didn't have that conversation with them. I had it with my husband. And he was completely confused. He's like, what is going on? I was, don't worry about it. I got them. You work. Just call them by this name. Use this pronoun for now. You know, we did have some problems with my in-laws, and they still play games up until the time we cut off with them. So we don't have a relationship with my in-laws anymore. But we discovered that my daughter was essayed by a family member on my husband's side. And she was very young. And we did not know that. We thought, oh, your dad having the emergency bowel obstruction, mommy having cancer, your twin transitioning, moving cross country, all within 2 years was what caused the self-harm and the suicidal ideations, wasn't that? Those were the straws that broke her back. But when we trace back 2 years of therapy, going on medication, we watched her very closely for 2 years. Fostered a lot of kittens. That's why at one point we had 12.3 kittens. Anyways, but we didn't know that she had it happened when she was 3, and it finally downloaded. She was safe enough in the middle of a therapy session. We were really lucky that she told us, because I could have lost her 10 years ago if she didn't tell her. And there was touch and go a lot of times. I don't talk about it, and I have permission to speak on it, but we almost lost her a few more times after that. It's pretty scary. You know, and we're really grateful that she hung in there. It's hard when you're that low, you don't want to be alive anymore. That never goes away. It just becomes managing every day.
Now, did you go to therapy during any of this?
Oh, yes. I had to go to therapy because I had so many unprocessed things. And then we found this amazing therapist. Now, she is a complex PTSD specialist. Okay, so PTSD is one big trauma that your body and your mind and your nervous system cannot process. Complex PTSD is a series of T's, big and little, doesn't really matter, that occur mostly in your childhood. That because, you know, babies and young children can't make sense of the world. We only have power on ourselves. So we turn a lot of the powerlessness into blaming ourselves, and we come up with all these imaginary rules to make sense of the world. And then because she's more Carl Jung based, and that is also overlapping with internal family systems, meaning the point is that the ages that you had your traumas, there's parts of you stuck in those ages. And so when you're triggered now, those parts will come out and relive the trauma like it's happening right now when it was like years ago. And what we've been really doing is integrating, like bringing your lost parts back so that you can understand when something's getting triggered and then make sense of it has the present you that's way more powerful than the child part that got stuck back.
That makes a lot of sense. Wow.
If I dare to say this, because not everyone can afford it, I want to recognize that. We should all be seeing a therapist regularly that allows you to ground and anchor yourself, because they're trained to be trauma informed and hold space. This present therapist knew from the first day that most likely my daughter had been like essayed as a child, but she never brought it up. She just held space for her until she had that. My daughter had the download during therapy 2 years in. She never said anything. She didn't suggest it. It never came up. I know, because I was at every therapy session because my daughter needed me to be there. She didn't trust anybody. And, you know, now she goes to therapy by herself online. But those first 3 years, I was at every 2-week therapy session because they're homeschooled. I had no one to blame but me. I was like, I'm taking full responsibility. What did I do? You know? Yeah. So I was there for the download. When she was like, Mommy, I think I was essayed by Grandpa. And she said, what are we going to do if Daddy doesn't believe me? I said, I guess Daddy doesn't have a place in our lives then. Of course he believed us, by the way. We're still married.
Oh, gosh. What if Daddy doesn't believe me? I get that, though. Not necessarily Daddy, but that's a lot of people's and victims' fears that they're not going to be believed, whether it's by a loved one or just by whoever they're telling.
And here's the thing. It's like, you deserve that acceptance in that space. You don't have to remember the details. You just need the recognition and the space to be held.
Completely agree. Thank you, Jenny. I really appreciate this, and I appreciate all your time recording with me.
Thank you for having me, Amanda.
Absolutely. And thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of Amanda's Mindset. Thank you so much for tuning in to part 1 of my conversation with Jenny. As I mentioned at the beginning, this conversation was simply too powerful to squeeze into one episode. There's still so much more to unpack, and trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. If you thought today's conversation was powerful, just wait until part 2. Part 2 drops this Friday, where Jenny and I continue this incredibly honest conversation and explore even more about confidence, visibility, and what it truly means to step into your fullest, authentic self. Until then, keep breathing, keep shifting, and remember, everything is figure-outable. In case no one told you today, I'm proud of you, I'm rooting for you, and you got this. As always, if you enjoyed the show, I would really appreciate it if you would leave me a 5-star rating, leave a review, and share it with anyone you think would benefit from this. And don't forget, you are only one mindset shift away from shifting your life. Thanks, guys. Until next time.